So, I just can't stop reading. I don't know why, but I'm going to share with you an information piece from How They Croak today. And it's by Georgia Bragg, and it's illustrated by Kevin O'Malley. And a couple of days ago, I read the story The Math Curse, which was a lot of fun. And it got me thinking about famous mathematicians. And one famous mathematician we all know about is Albert Einstein. And guess what? I looked in the table of contents in this book and I discovered that he appears on page 151. So I hope you will enjoy with me and find at least 3 facts to add to your brain about Albert Einstein. And again, this is an information text, which means it's true. And it's about the demise of famous people, which means their deaths. Einstein equals massive cranium, question mark. He was a physicist. He was born in Ulm, Germany, March 14th, 1879. He died Princeton, New Jersey, April 18th, 1955, at 76 years old. So he died a good chunk before I was born, just in case any of you really do believe me when I say I'm 112. Albert Einstein made physics look fun and kind of silly. He smiled a lot, forgot to comb his hair, and rode his bike while he was unlocking the secrets of the universe. He made equations like E equals mc squared seem easy and beautiful. But it's hard work to think up something that simple. A normal brain has 25 million neurons linked by billions of connections, and ideas run through miles of nerve fibers at 200 miles per hour. Maybe Einstein had more neurons, or maybe his ideas moved faster, or maybe his brain was just bigger than everybody else's. Einstein himself shrugged off his smarts. A new idea comes suddenly and in a rather intuitive way, he said. Einstein was born in Germany into a Jewish family. His mom noticed that his head was fat with weird angles. He didn't even speak until he was 3, but his chubby noggin was the right size for soaking up geometry and science. Pretty soon, Einstein's big head was outthinking his teachers. He dropped out of high school and went to a Polytechnic Institute in Switzerland to see what he could learn someplace else. But once a student there, he spent a lot of time not going to class. Einstein Lab was his own brain. Okay, boys and girls, I am not suggesting you don't go to school. However, if you can publish a piece of work by the age of 11 and you want to take a little break, that might be different. Oh, and it becomes a world-famous, world-renowned idea. Until then, no, school for you. Einstein was only 26 when he came up with the general theory of relativity. His paper on photoelectric effect earned him the Nobel Prize. Everybody wanted a piece of him. His ideas were in demand, and he was given honorary doctorate degrees in science, medicine, and philosophy from universities all over the world. But the world was at war a lot of the time. During World War I, Einstein became a pacifist. He believed in a world government. A few years before World War II, Einstein left Germany and moved to the United States. He spent 22 years at Princeton University teaching and doing research. He grew old, and he had great pain in his stomach. Even with the best medical care, the inevitable happened. The abdominal aorta, the main artery of the heart, which leads to the stomach, stretched out like a balloon and started to leak. Ugh. Albert Einstein died in New Jersey on April 18th, 1955, of an aortic aneurysm, a burst artery. He was 76 years old. The world's most famous genius and humanitarian was dead. He had expressed a wish to be cremated. But before that happened, Einstein's body was examined in a so-called routine autopsy. The pathologist on duty, Thomas Harvey, couldn't believe his luck when he saw Einstein's chilled corpse splayed out on the steel table. First, he sliced Einstein's body open right down the middle. The rib cage that had protected Einstein's insides for almost 8 decades was jimmied open. With tweezers, clippers, pruning shears, a bone saw, and various other tools of the trade, the pathologist examined Einstein's guts, his liver, lungs, kidneys, hearts, and all sorts of glands and filter systems were detached and lined up on a table. The pathologist confirmed the cause of Einstein's death. The completely unnecessary post-mortem was complete, but Harvey's stars had aligned in a way that he refused to ignore. This was his moment to be famous. It's not every day you get a genius to autopsy, he said later. Einstein's face still looked just like Einstein, in a waxy sort of way. One plus about corpses is that they feel no pain. So when Harvey parted Einstein's hair neatly across the top of his head, sliced open the scalp from ear to ear, and unfolded it over Einstein's face and down his neck, it was painless for all concerned. He cut Einstein's skull in half just above the eyebrow with a special electric saw that shut down when it sensed soft tissue. Then, with the skull chisel wedged in place and a few whacks of a mallet, Einstein's cranium came off with a sticky, sucking sound. His spinal cord and everything else that wired Einstein's thinking tank to the rest of him was snipped free. Against the deceased's wishes and without permission from the next of kin, Harvey reached in and removed Einstein's brain. The pathologist couldn't wait to measure it. He would forever be the man who had confirmed what everybody already figured. Einstein's brain was larger than everybody else's. It had to be. Harvey placed Einstein's noodle in the grocery scale hanging from the ceiling. The brain weighed 2.7 pounds, the weight of a head of cabbage. That's a tad less than the average brain. What? That couldn't be right. The pathologist didn't want to give up his chance at fame too fast, so he plopped Einstein's brain into a jar of formaldehyde. The guy stuffed cotton in the now empty black hole in Einstein's skull. The top of the cranium was set back in place, and it stayed put after Einstein's peeled face and scalp were sewn back together. The pathologist arranged Einstein's hair in a really bad old man comb-over to hide the stitches. The organs were returned to the torso, and Einstein's chest was stitched together like a seam on a baseball. Thomas Harvey met with the press and reported his findings. He didn't mention that Einstein's brain was now floating in a jar in the body parts room, and when Harvey got back to the autopsy room, Einstein's mangled remains were off to be cremated. At the crematorium, the mourners didn't notice their loved one's upper story had been gutted of all its marbles. Einstein's oh-so-light body was cremated, and the ashes were scattered somewhere in New Jersey. Harvey told his boss and boasted to his family that he had Einstein's brain. That kind of news travels fast. Einstein's son, Hans Albert, found out someone had stolen his dad's brain when he read about it in the newspaper. He was furious and called the hospital, but somehow the pathologist talked Hans Albert into letting him keep the brain of the century. He promised Hans Albert he would use it in a scientific study. The hospital didn't see it that way and fired Harvey. So Harvey took the brain home. After all, Hans Albert had given it to him. In his spare time, Harvey photographed Einstein's intact noodle before he cut it in half and sliced it, luncheon meat thin, into 240 pieces, then embedded the slices on microscope slides. The leftover brain chunks filled 3 jars. Years and years went by. Einstein's brain spent a few decades in Harvey's basement in a beer cooler. It also took a trip across the country in a trunk of Harvey's car. Harvey didn't know the first thing about how to study the brain, nor was he able to get anyone else to do it. He sent slides through the mail to various brain researchers without his return address, and he never followed up. 30 years later, in 1985, one of the researchers who had received blobs of Einstein's gray matter discovered his brain had more cells than normal brains. But no one is sure if that's what made him so smart. After keeping Einstein's brain for 40 years, Harvey finally found someone to study it. Sandra Whittleson at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. He gave her 14 pieces of brain and his original photographs. She concluded that Einstein's inferior parietal region, the area associated with visual and spatial reasoning, was 15% larger than normal, and he didn't have a Sylvanian fissure, a particular crevice like you and I have. So instead of two key brain sections, Einstein had one big section. That study was done using Harvey's photographs and autopsy measurements, not the brain itself. Harvey could have returned the brain to its rightful owner after photographing and measuring it. Stealing something is always a stupid choice. Before Harvey died in 2007, he drove Einstein's brain back to Princeton Hospital and gave it to the pathologist who held his old job. The brain is still there. Einstein's theories continue to astound physics today, but before he died, he offered up another theory. Our death is not an end if we can live on in our children and the younger generation, for they are us. Our bodies are only wilted leaves on the tree of life. Boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed that and learned something about Einstein and also about perhaps the value of respecting the deceased's wishes. There you go. All right, take care. Bye.